Good morning, friends. I want to extend a warm welcome to you today. Everyone is welcome here. You are welcome here regardless of your age, your race, or the gender with which you identify. You are welcome here regardless of your income, your educational level, your religion, or your position in society. You are welcome here regardless of who you love or who you vote for. You are here regardless of the regrets that burden you or the mistakes you have made. In this community, we support each other in the sacred task of becoming, celebrate the transcending mystery of life, and rely on the transforming power of love. We are here to help each other along the spiritual pathways that lead towards happiness, compassion, and life fully lived. We are here to minister to all peoples and our planet. We are here to stand on the side of love in all things. Our BUUF theme of the month is mental health. Today, we are going to focus on grief and loss. It seems likely that everyone here, even the very young ones, have tasted grief. We have all experienced the loss of a parent, a friend, a marriage, a beloved pet, or a job we loved. Some of us have lost our health, our financial security, or the full use of our bodies and minds. In today's service, bereavement counselor Deborah Bledsoe from Center for Hospice Care, Elkhart, will speak to us about her experiences helping people through the grief process. Additionally, Harvey Johnson and Lisa Fuller will bring us some poetry. Beth LaFleur, Candace Onweller, and the BUUF musicians have chosen some wonderful music for us, and I will, during the story for all ages, talk about death. After the service, we will have our circle talk. Deborah has graciously agreed to stick around for that. Let's now turn to our announcements, which are found at the end of the email you received yesterday. Are there any additions or corrections for those announcements? Let us move on then to our offering. And the words will again magically appear, and they have. This fellowship is the community of ourselves. Its resources are our resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it. And thank you, everyone, for your continued generosity.
So our offering pieces music comes a video by our resident rock expert, Ralph. It is called, let me get the correct information here. My Dark Places by the band Stiff Little Fingers and their album in 2014, No Going Back.
Okay, go ahead.
My Dark Places, Stiff Little Fingers. This video is brought to you by Budgie Productions Limited. Bringing video experience home and putting the torch to flaming youth. 1, 2, 3, and... Well, it cuts just like a knife, takes away your love of life, puts out the fire and leaves you with the ashes. You lay there down in the hole, and what you love just leaves you cold. It's hard to get the strength to face the morning. Some days you lay there and you feel like screaming. Some days you think that you can't just get up anymore. But I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to my dark places. No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back to my dark places. Well, the days drag slowly by, and all you wanna do is cry. Nothing makes sense, nothing has a reason. and the world is not the same, but you feel you're the one to blame. Sometimes you just feel like you're burning up inside. Sometimes you feel just the side of screaming. Sometimes you feel that you won't ever go out anymore. But I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back to my dark places. No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'm not going back to my dark places. Well, something that you just can't see, but it seems so real to me. I wish for 1 minute you could be me. It's such a tragedy, but I wish that you could see. I wish you'd understand you could be me. Well, I made it through in the end with the help of many friends. Some who help by simply just believing. And the world looks brighter now, but I know someday, somehow, I could end up back there in an instant. Some days, you know, I even feel like laughing. Some days I know I realize I've gotta be on guard. But I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back. No, I'm not going back to my dark places. No, I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'm not going back to my dark places.
Thank you, Ralph. Wonderful.
Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light and giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go.
Thank you. Very beautiful. Harvey, thank you. And now we have our message, our guest speaker, Deborah Bledsoe. Deborah, can we get Deborah up on the screen? There we go. Deborah, you're coming to us from the sanctuary of your United Methodist Church.
Yes, actually, we have a small chapel that we put in my personal church after our longtime pastor died. So sorry, there's not better lighting in here.
We can see you very well, and we're looking forward to what you have to say today. So
yes, you know, it is truly an honor to be here with all of you. I love how engaging everyone is, and Meg and Steve, you know, just sharing what you're going through is very applicable to some of the things I'm going to talk with you about today. So my name is Deborah Bledsoe, and I live in Elkhart, Indiana, and I spent, the first 20 or so years of my adult career life working in accounting. And when my oldest daughter graduated from high school, I thought, you know, I think I want to do something different, because our head accountant had passed away and his wife didn't want to keep the business going. And I just always was told by people, you're easy to talk to. So I went back to school, got a degree, and now I've been working with grief and loss about 17 or 18 years, around that. I worked in community mental health, counseling people. You may have seen that in your program. And about 12 years ago, I just kept feeling called to work with grieving people. And even when I worked in community mental health, I would just tell our secretary, well, give the grieving clients to me. I don't know why. Then I got an interview at Center for Hospice, which is where I work. And I remember going there, I guess, again, personally, I just felt called and went through the interview and thought, well, I don't really care if I get the job or not, because I love what I'm doing. And then I got a call back a second time. And I was like, wow. So I decided to take the job. It was scary at first because I didn't know what it would be like. I was so set in the career I was working in. But I have to say, I work now as a bereavement counselor. So 40 to even 50 hours a week, like last week was 50 hours a week. I work with grieving people who have lost someone that they love. And so a lot of the things I'm going to talk about do also apply to all types of loss, you know, like Meg shared with some of the people in her family in the division. That just is so very sad, because that is a loss too. So most of the loss I work with, actually pretty much all of it, is by death. Occasionally, I even have people come in for pet loss. So that kind of fits into the children who lost a fish and different things in their life. So I do about a 6-week group every now and then, in addition to individual counseling. And it's called the Living with Loss group. And this group is to help people to process their grief and to work through it. And so I always start by talking a little bit about what does grief look like. So there is a very well-known psychologist named William Worden, and I really like how he was able to put things into perspective, what a grieving person goes through. It's called the tasks of mourning, and some of you may have heard about that before, but he was just able to create this framework of the process of grief. So again, it doesn't necessarily go in this order, but it begins with accepting the reality of the loss. That is, sounds like, okay, well, somebody has died. I know that happened, but really accepting it is a really huge task, because what we find is nearly everyone has a split between their head and their heart when someone dies. So what our head knows, our heart doesn't want to really believe it. So that first year or so, especially when somebody dies, most people walk around on autopilot, in a fog. I can't believe this really happened. My head knows it, but it doesn't feel real. I talk with people who just want to pick up the phone. For example, I had a lady last week and her mother had died, and she goes, I just want to call my mom. So her head knows that her mom's not here, but our hearts don't want to believe it. And so what that creates is difficulty during special days, not only every day, but special days, birthdays, anniversaries. Some of the folks there that spoke today about sharing an anniversary and a birthday. So for somebody who's grieving, those can be really hard days when the person you love is no longer here. So accepting the reality of the loss is a huge
I think we've temporarily lost Deborah. Let's just wait a few minutes and hope she comes back.
Okay, am I back with you? I think I was frozen there for a minute on my screen.
You're back.
Okay, sorry about that. The second thing that William Worden talks about is working through the pain of the grief. That's really hard, and I truly feel honored to be in that sacred space, because it is very sacred when people are hurting and they come in and just say, you know, this is bigger than me, and I just want to process this and work through it. And I really love, Jim, how you talked about processing emotions, because that is pretty much what I do with people, and that's how we gain insight and epiphanies that can be really helpful in the grief journey. So working through the pain of the grief happens in many, many ways. People who come in for counseling, who come to groups, who just talk to anybody that's supportive to them can be really helpful in working through the pain of the grief. One of the things that I think is really hardest is adjusting to the environment without your loved one with them. That is task 3 that William Worden talks about with grief, because when your loved one isn't there anymore, it makes everything feel different. If they lived in your home, you might walk in the living room and see the couch they sat on, the chair they sat in, and that's an adjustment for somebody who's grieving. So, and that adjustment too kind of depends on what was your relationship like with the person who died. Is it somebody you talk to every day? Is it someone who lived in your home? Is it somebody that was just so very dear to you? And that can make that adjustment a lot harder depending on those different things, you know, the role that that person played in your life. And sometimes even if you have a relationship with somebody and it's not good, that really can bring about something called complicated grief that I'm not going to get into today, but that makes it harder to work through grief when there's other things that maybe were unsettled before somebody died. The last task that William Worden talks about is emotionally relocating your loved one. He reworded that, I want to say 4 times the last that I knew. And so I'll just kind of put it into my own words. What that looks like with the grieving people that I see, and especially some that I've seen for a while, is that initially there's that yearning and I just want to be with them. I just want to talk to them. It's the first thing you think about when you wake up and the last thing you think about when you go to bed. And eventually, most people are able to just feel that person in their heart and with them all the time. And again, remember, these are in no particular order, but those are huge tasks of mourning, not only provided by this educator who is a psychologist, but by the people that I work with every single day in counseling and grief counseling. So that's a lot about the tasks of mourning. And I also, and it's up to you, Jim, if anybody, well, I can stay for questions at the end. So I'll just go ahead and finish some of the things I was talking about. So most of us think about emotions when someone dies. Grief affects us in so many other ways too. So, and it gives you a different perspective. For example, if someone has lost a spouse, you might have had empathy for other people that lost a spouse, but when you walk through that journey, it's a lot different. And I think that's something important for people to know if you are supporting someone who had a loved one die. When you're walking through that same similar journey, it kind of opens your eyes to the depth of the pain that a grieving person feels. So there's lots of emotions, and I noticed that what you had sent out in an email there talks a little bit about it. It's the little picture with the cat on it, talking about the ways that grief affects people. So emotionally, that can look like a lot of different things. I think most of us think about sadness because yes, it is sad when we lose somebody we love, but there's other things too, like irritability. That's something that people don't even realize how when somebody's grieving, it kind of strips you to the core and brings about a whole different set of emotions that might be uncomfortable for people that you know and love. And tensions are high, and I think it was Steve that talked about a loved one that's dying and there's some division in the family. That's not uncommon at all because tensions are high when you're about to lose somebody that you love. So that brings about a lot of irritability, emotions that people don't know what to do with. It puts people in hypervigilant mode. So see, that can even happen before somebody dies too. And there's also a feeling of loneliness that comes with grief. And that loneliness, there's a difference between being lonely and loneliness. So being lonely might mean I just need people around me. Most of us do. We do need other people around us. But there's a different kind of loneliness that happens with death. And that is the part of your heart where your loved one resided. And so you might be able to be around 10, 15 people. why do I still feel lonely when I have all these people around me that, if you're fortunate, that love and care about you? It's because the person who died, the part of your heart where they reside, doesn't heal very easily or quickly. It's a process and it takes some time. So that's why loneliness is on that sheet. And fear and panic creates a lot of anxiety. Sometimes people that have never had anxiety experience it for the first time when someone dies, and that can be a little scary. Just the anxiety that happens, and apathy or feeling apathetic, just kind of not caring about anything. I hear that from people after someone dies, saying, I can't seem to find joy in anything. The good news is that it does get better. Well, if you are able to process your grief, it definitely gets better. But again, there's no time frame for that. Grief also affects us cognitively. It affects our thinking of how we think. I've had adult children bring in a parent when one of their parents have died and said, my mother's suicidal or my father's suicidal. And I'll sit down and I'll talk with them. And then I'll learn that they're not suicidal. They're just saying, you know, I just really want to be with my wife, with my husband, with my child, whoever it was that died. It's a natural part of grief. I do take it very seriously if someone does say they want to harm themselves, or if they're worried about someone harming themselves. But I have to sort that out when I meet with people. But usually I find it's just that grief is so great that people just want to be with their loved one. There's also forgetfulness that happens cognitively, maybe even with speaking, like I know what I want to say and I forgot what I was going to say. People who love to read might find that halfway through a paragraph, they're like just kind of checked out. That's very common. Loss of interest in much of anything, things that maybe you enjoyed doing before just don't feel as joyful, or maybe you don't feel as engaged. Lower attention span, that's another thing. And grief affects us physically, so I always talk to people about taking care of themselves physically, especially for people who are caregivers, because it's easy to put your own health on the back burner when you're a caregiver, pass up your own doctor's appointments, maybe because you have to take someone else to the doctor. So you really have to think about that when you are a grieving person, because it takes a toll on your body. And so I always encourage people, go to the doctor, get a checkup. Even if you weren't a caregiver, if somebody died, just go get checked out to make sure what is wrong is really grief and it's not something physical or something bigger. And that has happened a few times when I encourage people to go to the doctor. We find out, wow, there are things physically wrong, mainly because maybe people have had to neglect their own health while they were caregiving. Another interesting way that grief impacts people is socially. So if you are a person who has lost somebody you love, or you're supporting someone who has lost someone that they love, you might find that they need people, but they avoid people. It's hard. I hear from grieving people, if someone says to them, how are you doing? And the response I hear from the grieving people is, do you really want to know? Or sometimes people will say things to a grieving person like, wow, you're so strong, maybe because they're out and about. But the truth is, they only look strong because it's the only choice they have. You know, life does move on, but our loved ones, you know, stay with us forever, just like the story of the turtle and how he'll always be remembered for the things that he did, and the dolphin and the manatee and all the people that he helped. So that's really the truth of it. But when a person is feeling grief, and they're in that social space around people, they often find themselves avoiding other people for that reason. They just don't want to hear, how are you doing? And sometimes they go into their comfort zones, and it's hard to go out back into the world when they're feeling wounded from their loss. Spiritually, no matter what a person's spiritual belief system is, I find with the majority of people that it impacts them in some way. If it's a person who believes in God, they might say, you know, I'm really second guessing what I was taught, what I believed. So that is a really big thing. I've had people say, I used to think my loved one is in heaven, and now I'm like, where really is my loved one now? Where are they? So it is a challenge, but it's something that does eventually come full circle. So maybe some people's belief system changes, sometimes it stays the same, but I note that when I speak with people, because it's really, really important to acknowledge the many ways that grief impacts a grieving person. That is why grief is so heavy. That's why a grieving person often says to me, I'm having a hard time just getting up, taking a shower, and going to the store. It's like putting 100-pound weight on their back and saying, now get up and do the things you did before. And it's heavy because of the weight of the grief. So how am I doing on time?
You're doing fine, Deborah. If you have a full 20 minutes, just go ahead and take as much time as you need. We want to hear what you have to say, and we are enjoying and finding helpful what you're saying so far.
Okay, so and I noticed, I think in your program you mentioned a beautiful quote by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and the work that she did was so amazing. I would say as recently as even 20 years ago, we didn't acknowledge the depth of grief and how it impacts people. Her work was the foundation for so much of what we do in the bereavement world and supporting grieving people. One of the important things that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did was she spoke with people who were dying and did interview them and learned so much. One of the things that came from that was what a lot of people have coined the stages of grief, but in reality, those things were things that people experience who were dying. But people who lost somebody they loved said, yes, I'm going through that. So that's kind of how we came about with the stages of grief. And that includes denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Those are all the things that grieving people go through, but the people who were dying went through that too. So that opened up a whole world of us to explore and talk with grieving people. One thing too, I want to point out is that if you think about the stages of grief, now and then people do come in and they'll say something like, right now I'm in the denial stage of grief. And what we've learned from working with so many people is that grief is in fact circular. So it's not linear. So it's not like you get through this stage and you go through the next. It's circular. You can be anywhere. I present something called a grief wheel when I meet with people. I can't give credit to the original person who started the grief wheel. It's been amended so many times that we're not even sure who started it. But again, the things that I say to you are things that I have learned from the many, many people that I work with. So if you picture a round circle, a wheel, if you will, and when the loss happens, whether it's the loss of a relationship, the loss of an animal, the death of a loved one, for some people it's separating, the loss of a relationship, like Meg shared, of a family member, this can all apply. You enter in this place of shock, like, wow, I can't believe this happened. This has really changed my world in a lot of ways. And just kind of staying in this grief wheel a while, there's another part on it labeled protest. Protest is where we kind of look back and think, what if I wouldn't have done this? What if I wouldn't have done that? What if the doctor would have done this? What if the doctor wouldn't have done that? And again, I'm speaking in general terms. That can look like anything, but it's kind of the second guessing. One of the things that happens in that phase is rumination, maybe something playing over and over in your head. If it's maybe losing a family member, not by death, but by a relationship, it might be that final argument when you couldn't get your point across. If somebody died, it might be if you were with them, the moment they died, you might ruminate. So that becomes very magnified in this phase. And the next one is the disorganization, and that can be physical, kind of like I talked about when I talked about the ways grief affects you, but also mentally, and that would fit into the cognitive part. So what I hear from people, perhaps you're in the workforce and a very organized person, I can't even think straight. I forgot to send this to my boss. I forgot to do this. I forgot to do that. I had a lady who told me that she ran over a curb coming in for counseling. She's like, I'm a good driver, but I was in a daze and I ran over a curb. So people they lose car keys. They lock themselves out of their cars. I mean, the stories are endless, and the physical and mental disorganization of people that what I call in that grief wheel. Then there's 4 parts to this. So there's the shock and the protest and the disorganization. And the other part of the grief wheel is reorganization. And that can begin by that first day when you wake up and your life has changed in some way. Whether, again, it's by death, loss of a relationship, whatever that might look like for you. So all of a sudden, I can't pick up the phone and call my loved one, or I walk into the living room and they're not there. Your life is reorganized. But so people stay in what I'm calling the grief wheel for quite a period of time. There's no time frame. It's different for everyone. And it's kind of a blurry place to be. For example, that first year when somebody dies, I might have said this earlier, but it's like a fog for most people. Sometimes people even wait a year to come in for counseling and say, there's so much about this last year that I don't even remember. It's just a fog. In the beginning, most people say, I was invited to dinner, upset because family wasn't including me, but I didn't really want to go. Or I went and I really didn't feel much of anything. I was numb. Reorganization a year or two down the road might look like, I went to dinner with some friends and I actually found myself laughing. I actually enjoyed that. So they stay in that grief wheel for a while. And it's really helpful to have people to talk to process your grief, whether it's that trusted friend or maybe a pastor if you have a faith community, or just somebody who can empathize and understands, who can be with you and let you cry. Out of the corner of this grief wheel is something called growth. That had said something different a long time ago, but I like the word growth because I see people grow in their pain. But if I told them in the beginning that this is going to be a period of growth for you, they kind of don't believe it. Like, how can anything beautiful come out of all this pain that I've been through? But in the poem that you shared about the turtle, look at the beauty that came out of that, like those beautiful memories of the wonderful things that turtle did. So that's kind of the final part of the grief wheel, is the growth and the beauty and the memories that come. So in the beginning, memories can be very, very hard to think about because the grieving person initially says, I'm not going to have that anymore. And that's so, so painful. But remember, while we're living on this earth, while we are sharing with people and talking, we're creating beautiful memories. Your service today did that for me. When I saw What a Wonderful World on your agenda, I thought, oh, great, I might have to mute myself because I had a brother that I was very close to. And he died, and his favorite song was What a Wonderful World, but it was by Louis Armstrong. That was a total reframe for me, the beautiful diversity. It was uplifting. I thought of that song as just being really sad. So while we're here supporting each other in this life, while we're here, we can really make a difference by helping other people. But if you are a person who is grieving, who is hurting, it's important to really, really take care of yourself, to listen to your body. If your body says, wow, I'm just too tired to get up today, A, consider a doctor's appointment, but B, maybe take a little bit of a break. Maybe lay in bed a couple hours and let your body recover, because we have to acknowledge how heavy grief is. But the key is balance. So it's not staying there. It's balancing that out. So if you had a day where my body was so tired, I just needed to lay down, try to push yourself a little the next day and balance that out. So we're acknowledging, but we're also listening to our body and pushing on if you're able to. Lowering expectations for yourself is another way to cope with grief. if you're a person who is that go-to for everybody, if you're a person with a list a mile long and look at everything I get done, it's important to lower expectations for yourself if you're grieving. You might find that, matter of fact, I find this with grieving people. If they come in for an appointment, that's a big task for them, especially if they're not in the workforce. You know, they'll say, I didn't want to come today. I'm so glad that I did. So just put a couple things on your list, whether it's I'm going to wash the dishes or, do a little bit less. That's okay to lower your expectations. Some people aren't as fortunate, especially if you're raising children and you're grieving. That's a whole nother layer and a whole conversation for another day. But if you're able to lower the expectations for yourself, that's important to do. And let other people know what you need from them. If you have ever supported somebody who had lost somebody dear to them, a lot of people will say, well, let me know if you need anything. That's really hard for a grieving person. So when I'm working with grieving people, especially in the group, I encourage them, tell people what you need. Aunt Betty, I love that blueberry pie you made, or my husband would always shovel the driveway for me, and maybe you have somebody with a plow. It's okay to say, do you think you could do that for me? Because you can't do everything. With spousal loss, I find that couples fill in the gap for each other. So there's this huge gap. All of a sudden, a grieving spouse might be absorbing tasks that she wasn't used to. For example, I had one lady who never handled the finances, her husband did, and she was just in a real mess. And finally, her son's like, Mom, that's what I'm good at, and stepped up and helped her. So let others know what you need from them, and just don't feel like you can do everything, if you're that grieving person. If you find yourself needing counseling, get it. I'm not just saying that because that's what I do, but grieving people sometimes say, I feel like I'm going crazy. All of the things that I shared with you that grieving people go through creates a mindset of nothing in my world is the same. I'm disorganized. I'm feeling lost. I'm angry. I'm yelling at people. I never did that before. I have a low tolerance. That might be indicative of somebody who would really be in need of some counseling support. So allow that if you feel that you need it. And taking time for yourself if you're able to when you're grieving. That's a really big thing. And it can be hard sometimes to take time for yourself, especially I have someone I'm seeing in counseling right now. She was very close to her father, and her mother had already died, and she's got 2 young children. And when she came in, no, that's impossible. I work a full-time job. She teaches. She has 2 little children. And we really talked a lot about that. And she finally kind of took me up on that. And she's like, my mother-in-law did say that she could watch the kids for a couple hours. And so she started getting a massage every week. And that made all the difference. So sometimes if you really brainstorm or reach out to people, you might be able to find ways to take care of yourself or pamper yourself. Journaling is a very, very helpful tool. And Steve, I don't know if you are a journaler, but when my father was diagnosed with cancer, I started an online diary. And I think it was called mydiary.org, if I remember right. And I started journaling. And then when he died, I journaled. And now I look back on that, I was like, didn't feel like I personally was moving in my grief. And I look back at it now and I find that I did. Journaling is very helpful. I have clients that come in, I might throw that out there, the journaling thing. And some people say, I don't like to write, I don't journal. But the ones that do, if that would work for you, it can be very, very helpful, especially if you feel like you're not moving through your grief or things are getting harder. You might look back and say, even though I'm feeling more pain because my heart is getting it, what my head already knows, I can look back and say, wow, I am moving through this grief. And it will get better someday. Physical exercise is really hard to do when you're grieving, but that helps to build the endorphins in your brain that can really be helpful with grief, whether it's just taking a walk, whatever that might look like, that can be really helpful too. And maintaining a proper diet, that's really hard to do. I love how oftentimes people will bring food to somebody who's grieving. And I personally remember that when my dad died, everybody's bringing things to my mother's home, and there was like more food than any of us could ever eat. But it was like, wow, you know, we totally forgot to eat because we were so immersed in, you know, caring for him. So those are just some of the ways to take care of yourself when you're grieving. And that's pretty much, I know I said a lot. I sometimes take 3 weeks in my group to share what I just shared with you. So I hope that wasn't information overload, but yeah, I'll stay behind if anybody does have any questions. And but that's pretty much everything I wanted to share with you. And again, thank you for having me today. It's truly an honor to be part of your service today.
Well, thank you, Deborah. That was a lovely talk.
Thank you, Deborah. That definitely was a master class in grief counseling, and it was much appreciated. This poem is from Enfleshed, a website and newsletter of spiritual nourishment for collective liberation. And it's written by Reverend Anna Bladel. Darling one, you precious mess, you exhausted, grieving, hollowed, hallowed, hallelujah of a human. Today, if even for a moment, may you feel your own beating heart, your own courageous core, your chest rising and falling with breath, which is spirit, which is life force, keeping pulse, marking time, finding space. Regardless of how you are feeling, no matter what you are capable of or not, and just for a moment, may you find rest. A bit of ease, held in that sacred rhythm that cannot be without you, because you precious mess, have breath and heart and life force pulsing through you yet.
Thank you, Lisa. That was really lovely. And now we're going to extinguish our chalice, and we're going to go directly to circle talk. I think a lot of you would like to talk to Deborah. And as Lisa extinguishes the chalice, I will just simply say, we extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight.